reading specialist and the author of the blog Learning at the Primary Pond. And today I want to chat with you a little bit about grammar. And we're going to talk about if you should really be teaching grammar in K-2 and if it's appropriate to teach grammar in kindergarten. So if you're tuning in, I would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to say hi. But we're just going to go ahead and dive into these big topics. So before we really dive in, I want to talk a little bit about what my perception of what grammar instruction was and what it was for me growing up. Maybe you can relate to some of this. And also what my experiences were teaching grammar, because honestly, and I don't love to say this, it's kind of embarrassing, I used to be really bad at teaching grammar, and sometimes I just ignored it completely. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about that unfortunate journey. But I don't know about you, but when I think about teaching grammar or what grammar instruction is, I think back to my own school years. And my own school years involved, I remember, I don't know why this stood out to me so much, but in middle school, we had this, it was like a grammar textbook, and it was kind of small, but the pages were literally yellowing, and we had to diagram sentences and do all kinds of drills that really made no sense to me. I really didn't use them. You know, I loved writing as a student, and I still love writing, but I have to say that all that grammar junk that I didn't help me with writing at all. Holler at me if you agree. Holler at me if you relate to any of that. But so I did all of that. And then I also remember back even further into my elementary school years, we did DOL, so daily oral language, where we were fixing sentences, trying to find the mistakes, and just correcting them. So really what stood out to me was like drill, drill, drill. And so then fast forwarding a little bit to when I became a teacher, a primary teacher, to me in my head, that was like, that's not appropriate, that's not helpful, that's boring. So fast forwarding again, or I guess we're just going back to when I first started teaching, and I've always taught primary, I felt that because what I understood grammar instruction to be was not primary friendly, that I shouldn't really teach grammar. And I mean, of course, we would work on things like capital letters and periods, mostly in the context of writing, but I really wasn't doing a separate time for grammar instruction because I didn't feel like it was developmentally appropriate, what my understanding of what grammar instruction was supposed to be based on my own school experiences. So I really kind of ignored it, and I'm embarrassed to admit that, because this is not like, oh, I used to be bad at cooking. This is like, oh, I used to be bad at teaching this area of literacy to children, like real live kids. I don't love to admit that I was really bad and kind of ignored teaching grammar, but that's where I was for a while. And so after some time went on, I kind of learned that it was a good thing to integrate grammar instruction into writing. And I was already doing a little bit of that, but I started to do a little bit more. And so grammar instruction became one part of my writing instruction. It wasn't all of my writing instruction, because of course, grammar is just one component, and you still have content and all kinds of other stuff that you want to think about. But it became more, present in my literacy block. But that still wasn't enough. What I found was that my kids needed a little bit more. And so finally, what I've landed on now is that grammar is integrated into my writing instruction for sure. I'm going to talk a little bit more tonight in my full-length webinar about how I do that. And then grammar was integrated a little bit into my reading instruction. And again, in the webinar, I'll talk more about that, more details about that coming soon. But then I also made time a few times a week, not every day, but a few times a week, to have dedicated grammar lessons, because what I found was that combining just a few mini lessons throughout the week, doesn't have to be like hours and hours, combining that with integrated grammar instruction into reading and writing was really the best approach. And what I found is that when I was doing all of those things, that's when my kids really started to understand why things like punctuation were actually important and apply them a little bit more to their writing. Now, do my kids 100% master all grammar skills? No, but the good thing is that, kids have more than 1 year to master it. So even if you're teaching like first or second grade, if your kids aren't consistently putting in their periods, their capital letters, although we want to work on it for sure, know that you're not the only teacher who's teaching them, right? They have next year and they have the following year. These are not things that they 100% need to master in 1 year, even though, of course, that's what we're working toward. But anyway, that's kind of what my own grammar journey has been. And so as a result of all that, that's really motivated me to want to share with you what I do now and why I feel it's more effective than not teaching grammar at all, obviously, or only integrating it a little bit here and there. And so tonight, that's what we're going to talk about. Just a little bit, though, because I actually have a full-length grammar webinar planned for you, and that's happening in a couple of weeks. I will be emailing out an invitation next weekend, I believe next Sunday. And if you would like that invitation to go to the grammar webinar, if you go to the text in this post and it'll say like sign up to get an invitation or whatever, make sure that your email address is in there because I would love to have you attend the whole thing. This is just kind of like a little bit of a snippet, chatting a little bit about whether we really should teach grammar in K-2 and teaching grammar in kindergarten, is that appropriate at all? So this is just the tip of the iceberg. But so as you can probably kind of guess, my answer to should you really teach grammar in K-2 is yes, but it should, and I really think that this is true of any other grade. The purpose, my understanding of grammar has really changed, and now I feel that teaching grammar is done so that our students can speak and write well following the conventions of standard English. And so there's a lot that goes into that. That doesn't mean that we're just throwing sentence fixers at them and having them fix things. The research actually shows that that doesn't help them learn grammar. Those little, like worksheets and drills, like doing just that isn't effective in helping them learn grammar. And I have some resources cited for you there in one of the blog posts in the text. But what grammar is all about is, again, getting our kids to speak well, to write well, following the conventions of English. And when we integrate that into reading, when we integrate that into writing and make it relevant to what they're already doing, then yeah, I absolutely think that we should teach grammar in K-2. It just doesn't look like tons of worksheets and drills. It can be fun, it can be relevant to them. And even in kindergarten, grammar in kindergarten, again, it's not talking about, like this is how you diagram a sentence, or I don't even use the word verb or noun with them. If that's something that your kids can grasp, awesome. But in my experience, they're still, that's very abstract. They're still just developing a concept of what a word is. And developing a concept of what a word is, I actually kind of consider that part of grammar. It's a print concept, but when kids understand what a word is, then they can actually write much better because they'll understand, oh, this is a single unit of speech and I can put it on the page with spaces in between. So with kindergarten, maybe a grammar activity, of course, we're looking in books and we're counting words in books and doing all sorts of in-context stuff, but maybe it's just something as simple as like using a bingo dabber and dabbing the ones that are words. So understanding the difference between a letter and a word. I kind of consider that a type of grammar for kindergarten. That's what's appropriate, right? Like, again, we're not talking about all these abstract terms and diagramming sentences. This is like a very simple print concept, grammar concept thing that I would do with my kindergartners. Another thing that you could do with your kindergartners, and these are just examples, I actually have, in the full-length webinar, I actually have a lot more examples for you and a free week of grammar lesson plans for kinder first and second, so definitely make sure that you get on the list for that invitation. But in kindergarten, grammar also looks like a lot of oral language stuff. So talking about, like, for example, different actions. So even though I'm not necessarily using the word verb, we talk about action words and can you act out skip? Can you act out eat? We can play Simon Says with this. Like that is a form of grammar. It's really laying the foundation for future like speaking and writing abilities and developing what they already have. So again, yeah, I think grammar is appropriate to teach in kindergarten, but only when it's something like this. Or maybe you're working on preposition words and you are having the kids, like I like to have the kids do a little obstacle course. We'll set it up and we go over something and under something else and around something else. And so then after they've done the obstacle course, we come back and we have a chart with all these words. We went over this, we went under that. Maybe then you take like a plastic cup and they have a counting bear, you know, one of those little bears. And you say, okay, put the bear inside the cup, put the bear next to the cup, very hands-on. But yeah, that's grammar. Like prepositions, like that's grammar. You may not be saying to them, this is a preposition. Prepositions tell when and where, but you're still working on those foundational concepts. Maybe you have them show what they know by doing something like you've got like a little scene, like this is a kitchen and I've got little pictures here. So you tell them they're gonna cut all this stuff out, glue the plant on top of the table or put the dog under the table. So again, just a very it's following directions, using those understandings of preposition words. It's grammar, but it's at a kindergarten level. So yes, I do feel like grammar is appropriate in kindergarten. It's just not what I would think of as grammar, at least not the type of grammar instruction that I had growing up, sorry. So let's talk a little bit more about what my grammar approach looks like now, because I mentioned that it looks very different now than it did before, especially because before I was largely ignoring grammar instruction. But now what I really like to do is I follow this like 3-step or 3-stage approach. And again, I will go way more in depth on this during the full-length webinar, and I'll show you examples and you'll get freebies and stuff. But the 3 stages that we go through when it comes to any type of grammar skill or concept, kind of lumping, by the way, like language, grammar, not necessarily vocabulary, but just like, word order and things like what I was showing you with prepositions, verbs, capitalization, punctuation. With any one of those kind of skills, which again, come back to the purpose of being able to speak well and write well, we will explore the concept, we will practice the concept, and then we will apply the concept. Because the purpose of grammar instruction is for our kids to be, good speakers and good writers. And so if we're not having them take what they're learning and actually apply that to their writing, then why are we doing it to begin with, right? We have to make sure that they're seeing the connection, the relevance between what they're doing and their writing. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this live, when I was doing all those grammar drills when I was in school, my teachers weren't connecting it to my writing. They weren't saying like, oh, well, you're learning about adjectives so that you can add adjectives to make your own writing more detailed and interesting, right? I was just learning this is an adjective. Okay, so what? Who cares? Well, grammar and conventions are useful, and we really need to be able to show our kids, especially in their writing, sometimes just their speech, how they're going to use the things that we're teaching them. So just briefly talking about the explore stage. In the explore stage, I'm really just having the kids, I would say, explore, right? Like they're seeing the grammar concept in context. I might have sentences for them, some example sentences, and I'll read them to them and with them. And then I'll say, what do all of these sentences have in common? And they all end with a question mark, and we can start talking about questions. So we're really just kind of exposing them to the concept at this stage. I also really like to bring in mentor texts. So pulling out sentences or parts of books that we've read, not necessarily going out and reading like a bunch of new books because, our schedules are so packed, but taking books that they already know and finding examples of these grammar concepts in those books. So if we're working on questions, finding question marks in context. I'll pull books that I've read to them, show them, they already know the book, so it's not, it's not a really long drawn out lesson, but I'll show them examples in context in addition to showing them these other examples that I might already have for them. So we're exploring things. We're doing a lot of things with oral language. I'm not necessarily at this point asking them to write stuff or like do a ton of, sentence writing or application of their writing. It's just we're exploring the concept. Maybe they look for question marks in their own books. Just seeing this convention, whatever it is, in action in the wild is what I like to call it. And so then we get into the practice stage. And in the practice stage, once I feel like, okay, like they're pretty familiar with this concept, now it's time to practice. And so we might do a variety of things. I have a couple of example tasks here, but a lot of what I do, and this is mostly like 1st and 2nd grade when I'm talking about this here, but a lot of what I'll do is sentence writing. So use the whatever it is in a sentence. And like, let's say that we are working on list sentences with commas, right? So, I went to the store, comma, the zoo, comma, and the playground. Something that I like to do with the kids is I'll have them write like an order from a menu. So I'll show them this little menu and then they write a sentence telling me what they want from this pretend menu. So they love that. It's super simple. It gets them writing a list sentence with commas. It gets them practicing, we've already explored. You know, we already would have seen that in books. I already would have shown them examples. They maybe did some highlighting of a passage that had different sentences with lists and commas. They've already explored, so now they're practicing it in some way. This is when I bring in a lot of games too. Let me see if I can find, yeah, okay, so if we're working on contractions, I know I'm jumping between examples in the webinar. I'm gonna take you through one example through multiple stages, but let's say that we're working on contractions, first, second grade. I think this is from my second grade Grammar Alive resource. But so we've got, you know, like little fruits and vegetables, and they have 2 words on them, and, you know, they're all mixed up, but the kids put the little kind of puzzles together, is not, and then they're cooking up contractions. So they take this bowl, and you would have this laminated, and they like put it in the bowl, and then they'll write mix it up, and then they'll write the contraction right here. So the practice stage is really about taking what they've been exploring and putting it into practice, but not necessarily in like a high stakes way, not necessarily in their own writing quite yet. Might be an isolated example, like if we're doing exclamations. I don't know how well you can see this photo, but these are kids that are scared at the movies. And so if we've been working on exclamations, maybe they'll have a speech bubble and they'll do a little exclamation point. They'll write an exclamation about what they think the kids are saying. So easy to do, fun for them, but it puts into practice what they're learning. Sometimes the practice is oral too. I don't know if I've used this in stage 1 or stage 2, but if they've already know different types of sentences like telling, yelling, or showing lots of emotion with an exclamation, or asking, they may do something like they're spinning and saying a sentence. So they use a little spinner and they spin one of these nouns like rabbit, and then they spin one of these like question mark, and they will have to say, you know, where is the rabbit? So coming up with a question sentence based on this. The practice doesn't always necessarily have to be written. It doesn't have to be worksheety, because again, coming back to grammar being about kids learning to speak well and write well, like speech comes before writing. And so sometimes the practice is just like that. Another thing I've done with back to asking questions, and I know I'm jumping around, sorry, is I'll give them a photo and they have to like choose 2 question words and they'll like complete the sentence or whatever. So this is another way to practice. All right, so then our last stage is apply. And apply, you know, some things don't really lend themselves to being applied to kids' writing, but many things do. And I'll talk more about that in the full-length webinar. But the application stage is all about kids typically applying it to their writing. Now with kindergarten and certain skills in first and second, you really just want them to apply it to their speech. So it's not always writing, sometimes it's speech, but it's, for example, you know, maybe you've been working on list sentences with commas, that menu thing that I showed you, if I still have it here. And so the kids will have written a menu sentence from that fun little activity, but now I want to show them, hey, like you can write a list sentence, but guess what? It's also useful for you to do in your own writing. And we're working on how-to writing. So, you know, when they're telling the directions to the reader, like you will need paper, comma, glue, comma, string, comma, and markers, right? So they're taking that skill that they kind of have explored and practiced, and they're applying it to their writing. Now, I didn't ask them to do that right away, right? They got a chance to explore, play some games, do some isolated practice, and then and only then do I ask them to apply it to their writing. So as you can imagine, my online grammar instruction doesn't happen in writing, but they're also very connected. My Grammar Alive resources that are coming out in a week and a half, the 13th, I believe, in my TPT store, those, if you have my writing bundles, those will go together. So it won't be a perfect match, but if you're doing something in Writing Workshop, you'll typically have explored it and practiced it a little bit in Grammar Alive, the new resource. So my writing instruction and grammar instruction, even though they're not one and the same, they're definitely tied, because in this application little part, you want the kids to be applying what they're learning to their writing. So they have to kind of go hand in hand. All right, well, we've gone through all 3 stages. And again, I know it was a little bit hard with me just showing random examples here and there, but during the webinar, we are absolutely gonna go through like different skills at different levels, kinder, first, and second, and you'll see what it looks like. Again, when we were talking about kindergarten grammar, it's not what you might think grammar would be. It's not what we experienced, most of us adults experienced in school. It's very different. And so in that webinar, I'm going to show you examples. The freebie is going to have a whole free week of grammar lesson plans for you so that you can try some of that out. That comes from my new Grammar Alive resource, which is coming out the 13th of September. But we're going to go way more in depth in the webinar. Got like information about like a free little bonus gift for you. So make sure that you're signed up to get an invitation. I will be emailing out invitations to the webinar on the 8th. So I believe that's this Sunday. Now I know I may have missed some questions and comments. Thank you, Beth Ann, I appreciate this. Thank you, Julianne. Hey. All right, well, if you have a question or you have any issue getting signed up for that invitation, feel free to let me know. Again, I would love to hear your thoughts on this stuff. Like I shared at the beginning, my journey with teaching grammar was not necessarily something that I'm proud of, but I do feel like I've gotten a little bit better over time. So I would love to kind of hear what your experiences are, and we will go way more in depth on the webinar, which is happening in about 2 weeks from now. So I hope to see you on that webinar, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.